Front page of The Guardian. What is happening in Scotland? How have they changed the law? And Westminster aren't happy.
So the willingness, the ability to have your gender, if you change gender from the one on your birth certificate, the ability to change that has been reformed so that at the moment in the rest of the UK, you have to illustrate for 2 years that you are the gender you're living as. And now in Scotland, you'll be able to get that legal recognition at 3 months, so much sooner. And that was passed last night, late last night in Scotland. And it's the biggest rebellion that the SNP has had during its 15 years in power. And now today, Number 10 has said that they might block that because gender laws are devolved to the Scottish Parliament, but equalities laws, which this affects, as you can imagine, are not devolved. And so Number 10 Downing Street might overrule the Scottish Parliament, which I think, quite aside from the individual case of the gender questions, would be a crazy thing to do when support for independence is so finely tuned at the moment.
But a key point around this, Benjamin, is there's no need for a medical diagnosis. It's self-identification. So on that basis, isn't this worth going to battle about? Because this is a huge, huge change. And also, is this about Scotland trying to make its own laws and uncouple itself bit by bit, and therefore Westminster has to take a stand?
I mean, look, when you ask about whether Westminster should block Scottish Parliament from having these gender laws, well, it strikes me as odd that they only decided it might not be a devolved issue after it was passed. You know, these were first proposed 6 years ago, so it's quite striking that they changed their mind after the Act happens. But on the question about medical diagnosis and not having to have one, in order to get the recognition at the moment, the 2-year point in this country, in England, that is, you have to have demonstrated, you have to have lived, for example, if you're a trans woman, so male to female, you have to have lived like that for 2 years. And so this isn't affecting how people will behave or what bathrooms they might use, which is an example sometimes opponents give. This is about giving them the protection, the legal rights, the safety in themselves, and hopefully the mental comfort at an earlier stage. And, you know, Ireland, our neighbouring country, has had this in place for a few years and not had any problems.
The question, Morgan, is do you think Scotland have made the right decision? And if they have, should Westminster intervene?
I think it's an interesting one. I think, again, as Benjamin says, quite aside from the specifics of the law itself and how you feel about gender recognition, there are a few ways in which this law is diverging from UK-wide law. And if that's the case, if the government wants to take a stand and say, actually, we do need to intervene because it contravenes UK law, like the equalities law, and that's something the government, it would be unprecedented. They haven't intervened in this way before, and they only have 4 weeks to decide. So it's really going to be an issue that's not going to go away.
Do you think Scotland have made the right decision?
That's not for me really to say, honestly.
Very diplomatic.
Well, I mean,
do.
You do. Benjamin does. I mean, I have questions about the age going down to 16 because what we consider an adult in the UK is 18. So if Scotland is saying that you can make these legal changes at age of 16, I think that's kind of a very fundamental change. But if it were 18-year-olds and the time limit were decreased, I wouldn't be as concerned.
But Benjamin, don't you think that there are an emerging and growing number of individuals who regret going through a transition? And if that process is shortened in as far as proceeding perhaps towards surgery, is it something that we should really, be cautious about?
First of all, in order to be eligible for surgery, you already have to have done 2 years, right, in order to get the gender recognition
but now
before
it's 3
you can...
months. Isn't that the issue?
But then the delays for that are many more years after that because there's a shortage of supply to help those people. So you're not just getting that. But this idea that people are going to pretend that they're a gender that they're not, it's just farcical. It's not what happens.
It could be confusion. There's lots of people who are gay, who may have been quite happy to be gay people without making transitions. There is a lot of evidence coming off people with regret after transitioning. And surely, if we're pushing that process down to a shorter period, we're creating more issues.
Well, I don't accept that at all because, there are far, far more people who will spend their entire lives hiding and disguising the fact that they are not comfortable in something as fundamental as their gender. In fact, there are many people that won't even recognise that in themselves because they never knew such a thing existed. It was the 50th anniversary of the first ever Pride in Britain this year, and I spoke to some of the people involved in that, and overwhelmingly what they said, which blew my mind, was that they didn't even know they were gay because they'd never heard of such an idea. But that didn't mean they weren't. And so when people say the numbers of people transitioning or saying they're of a different gender is much higher than it was 10 years ago, well, that's now because they feel some comfort to express themselves and some legal protection. And I think that's a better thing.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I do think we still need to tread very carefully, especially when it comes to, again, people under the age of 18 accessing what could be life-altering hormones or treatments. But at the end of the day, I do also believe that adults have every right to make decisions which benefit them and their personal well-being within the confines of the law. And
I would just say that one of the other things that's cropped up that Scotland has a divergent view on is that they don't have to inform the parents if at school a child is saying they are, if they look like a boy but they're saying they're a girl. And I think that's absolutely right, because the idea that a parent who holds a particular prejudice, a particular bigotry, as far as I'm concerned, if they don't let
parental protection, it's not just bigotry and prejudice. They may have genuine concerns and should be consulted.
If a parent tries to stop the child being themselves in the most fundamental way, as far as I'm concerned, that's child abuse. Many gay kids wouldn't tell their parents, still to this day, because they're terrified of the prejudices they might hold. And I think they should be comfortable in that.